A hard hat, a safety rope, a lifting procedure. These aren't mere suggestions, they are blood-soaked lessons. In this episode, we dissect 6 tragic moments where everyday people traded their lives for a faster workday. This footage is strictly for educational purposes. Watch exactly how quickly the human body yields when basic safety protocols are ignored. October 2005. A massive logistics warehouse was slowly grinding to a halt for the night shift. The stagnant air smelled heavy with diesel exhaust and cardboard dust. At the far end of aisle 7, a heavy wooden pallet of expensive electronics was jammed tightly on the top tier of a steel rack. It sat exactly 16 feet above the polished concrete floor. Standard industrial safety protocols demanded a very specific solution for this exact problem. Workers were required to fetch a heavy steel safety cage and lock it securely to the forklift. But the officially approved cage was parked all the way on the opposite side of the sprawling facility. Retrieving it safely would take at least 20 minutes. The warehouse worker was deeply exhausted and simply wanted to clock out and go home. He decided to employ a rapid, improvisational shortcut to completely bypass the strict rules. He found 2 old wooden pine planks lying abandoned near a wet loading dock. They had been left outside in the bitter rain for several months. The moisture had deeply penetrated the grain of the wood. The timber had silently developed microscopic internal rot, severely weakening the core. To the naked eye, they just looked like dirty but perfectly solid pieces of wood. The worker carried the heavy planks over to the idling forklift. He laid them horizontally right across the cold steel forks. It was a makeshift lifting platform built entirely on blind trust and extreme impatience. He stepped up onto the wood and grabbed the vertical steel backrest to balance his body. He gave the driver a confident nod. The driver engaged the main hydraulic pump. The heavy diesel engine roared aggressively to life. The massive steel mast began to steadily extend upward. The ascent was relatively smooth at first. The worker slowly rose past the second tier of heavy steel shelving. He quickly reached the 16-foot mark. He was suspended precariously high above the unforgiving, solid floor. The makeshift platform hovered perfectly in place. The quick fix appeared to be a complete operational success, but the worker was slightly too low to reach the jammed cardboard boxes. The driver needed to make a minor, rapid altitude adjustment. This was the exact moment the fragile human world violently collided with the brutal laws of physics. The driver pulled the main hydraulic control lever backward, just a fraction of an inch too fast. High-pressure hydraulic fluid instantly flooded the main lifting cylinder. The heavy steel forks did not simply glide up smoothly. They violently jerked upward with extreme, sudden force. This mechanical action created a massive physical phenomenon known strictly as dynamic loading. When an elevator suddenly accelerates upward, the physical objects inside it momentarily become significantly heavier. For a fraction of a second, the sudden, violent acceleration massively multiplied the worker's total body weight. The intense downward force concentrated entirely on the dead center of the wooden planks. The rotten pine could barely support a quietly standing man. It absolutely could not support a suddenly accelerating man. The hidden decay deeply inside the timber completely surrendered. The compromised wood fibers did not simply bend under the pressure, they violently sheared apart. A loud, sharp crack echoed sharply over the noise of the idling diesel engine. The center of the makeshift wooden platform instantly disintegrated into pieces. The solid floor simply vanished entirely from beneath the worker's heavy work boots. The sudden structural failure instantly left him suspended in completely empty space. Gravity immediately took absolute and unforgiving control of the situation. A human body falling from a height of 16 feet quickly reaches a terrifying velocity. The entire descent lasted barely more than 1 single second. The human nervous system simply cannot react fast enough to physically correct a sudden freefall. The worker plummeted straight down through the open gap between the heavy steel forks. He impacted the solid, polished concrete floor with horrific, unmitigated physical force. The massive kinetic energy of the rapid fall transferred directly into his skeletal structure. The medical outcome was thoroughly documented in the final coroner's report. The subject instantly suffered fatal blunt force trauma to the head and neck. The massive physical shock rapidly caused an immediate and permanent loss of consciousness. The extreme physical trauma was entirely non-survivable. Fatal cardiac arrest inevitably followed within mere moments of the severe structural impact. The massive warehouse instantly fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only remaining sound was the low, steady rumble of the idling diesel engine. High up in the dusty warehouse air, the yellow steel forks remained locked perfectly in place. They were completely undamaged by the rapid sequence of events. They quietly held nothing but two jagged, broken pieces of deeply splintered pine. The ultimate terrible price for saving 20 minutes of time was fully extracted in a single terrifying second. August 2007. Standard industrial hard hats are highly engineered kinetic energy management systems, not merely simple plastic buckets. High up on an exposed 42nd floor, the deafening symphony of clanking heavy construction steel made casual verbal communication nearly impossible. An experienced ironworker was dealing with a minor personal annoyance. His critical personal protective equipment was suddenly compromised. A bright yellow hard hat is the single most important piece of gear on any active construction site. It is absolutely not merely a plastic bucket casually worn on the head. It is a highly engineered kinetic energy management system. The hard outer shell is designed to cleanly deflect falling objects. But the true life-saving mechanical magic happens entirely inside the helmet. A complex web of flexible nylon straps forms a tight internal suspension system. This sturdy webbing creates a vital 2-inch gap of entirely empty space between the hard plastic shell and the fragile human skull. When a heavy object aggressively strikes the exterior of the helmet, the internal nylon webbing forcefully stretches downward. It acts exactly like a heavy-duty mechanical shock absorber. It heavily slows down the crushing impact, safely dissipating the violent kinetic energy before it ever reaches the human bone. But the tired ironworker's helmet had a very specific mechanical problem. One of the small internal plastic anchor clips had suddenly snapped under pressure. This tiny clip securely held the suspension webbing directly to the outer shell. Standard industrial safety regulations strictly required him to immediately discard the broken helmet. He was legally supposed to walk all the way down to the ground floor supply shed. He desperately needed to sign out a completely new piece of properly functioning protective equipment. But the main mechanical elevator hoist was currently broken down for emergency maintenance. The long, exhausting walk down 40 flights of stairs would take at least 40 minutes. The busy worker selfishly chose to actively implement a fatal quick fix instead. He casually reached into his dusty tool belt and pulled out a small tube of industrial superglue. He carefully applied a thick, heavy bead of the clear, liquid chemical to the critically broken plastic clip. He pressed the torn nylon strap firmly against the inside of the heavy yellow plastic shell. He patiently held it there tightly until the chemical compound fully cured. He confidently placed the repaired helmet back onto his head and quickly returned to his heavy structural work. The psychological illusion of complete safety was absolutely total. The internal strap felt incredibly tight and perfectly secure against his warm head. But liquid superglue absolutely does not dry into a flexible rubber compound. It chemically dries into an incredibly hard, rigidly crystalline internal structure. It is fundamentally inflexible and profoundly brittle by its very chemical nature. By actively gluing the flexible suspension directly to the rigid outer shell, the worker unknowingly bypassed the primary safety mechanism. He had completely destroyed the critical internal shock absorber. He successfully built a solid, rigid bridge of hard plastic and highly brittle glue. This dangerous bridge securely connected the heavy outside of the helmet directly to his fragile skull. 3 hours later, a completely separate construction crew was actively working directly above his physical position. They were rapidly installing heavy steel anchor brackets on the exposed 45th floor. A careless worker accidentally kicked a large, solid steel adjustable wrench directly off the edge of the wooden platform. The extremely heavy hand tool instantly began a rapid, terrifying vertical descent. It cleanly sliced silently through the dusty construction air, tumbling wildly end over end. The focused ironworker below was completely absorbed in reading a complex set of paper blueprints. He never heard the heavy steel tool rapidly approaching from the blinding, bright afternoon sky. The heavy steel wrench violently struck the exact top center of his yellow hard hat. Under normal operating circumstances, the internal nylon webbing would have violently stretched far downward. The heavy straps would have safely absorbed the massive physical blow, easily saving his life. But the rigid, dry drop of industrial superglue fundamentally altered the physical mechanics of the sudden impact. The overwhelming downward kinetic energy violently hit the brittle chemical bond. The rigid superglue instantly shattered exactly like highly fragile glass into a microscopic white powder. The entire internal nylon suspension system experienced an immediate and absolutely total structural collapse. The heavy plastic outer shell was aggressively driven violently downward with absolutely zero mechanical resistance. The solid yellow plastic dome violently slammed directly into the worker's fully exposed cranium. Every single powerful joule of the falling wrench's rapid kinetic energy transferred perfectly into his skeletal structure. The medical conclusion was swift, brutal, and thoroughly documented in the final coroner's report. The subject instantly suffered catastrophic blunt force trauma to the superior cranial vault. The massive physical shock caused an immediate and permanent loss of brain function. There was an immediate and highly permanent loss of total consciousness. Total systemic biological collapse quickly followed within mere milliseconds, culminating in fatal cardiac arrest. The lifeless worker heavily crumpled onto the heavy steel floor, grating without ever making a single vocal sound. The heavy steel wrench aggressively bounced violently away, ringing out sharply against the bare metal structural beams. The bright yellow hard hat casually rolled quietly across the dusty metal floorboards. It eventually came to a very gentle stop right near a heavy welding tank. From the outside view, the protective plastic helmet looked absolutely and perfectly intact. It did not have a single visible scratch anywhere on its smooth surface, but heavily hidden deeply inside the yellow shell, a tiny dusting of white, shattered powder quietly remained. It was the absolute only lingering evidence of a seemingly harmless shortcut that completely bypassed the unbreakable laws of survival. November 2009. An independent demolition contractor was rapidly losing precious daylight and desperately wanted to drive home. He stood completely alone inside an abandoned Ohio textile factory, breathing in the sharp, bitter chill of freezing moisture and rusted iron. The air tasted sharply of freezing moisture, rusted iron, and century-old lime mortar. Standing entirely alone in the center of the demolished concrete floor was a single towering red brick wall. It was the absolute last interior partition left standing on the entire job site. The freestanding structure was exactly 12 feet high, roughly 20 feet long, and weighed over 3 metric tons. Standard industrial demolition protocols are strictly written in blood to safely handle exactly this kind of hazard. A completely safe crew must first build sturdy steel scaffolding right next to the masonry. They must then painstakingly dismantle the heavy structure single row by single row. They must work exclusively from the very top down to the floor. This tedious, time-consuming process guarantees that the overwhelming downward pull of gravity remains perfectly controlled. But the independent contractor working entirely alone that Friday afternoon was deeply exhausted. He was quickly losing precious daylight and rapidly running out of money for heavy equipment rentals. He desperately wanted to clear the site immediately and drive home to a warm house. He made a completely fatal calculation based on a massive misunderstanding of structural physics. He decided to completely bypass the safe scaffolding and bring the wall down with a rapid, quick fix. He firmly grabbed a massive 16-pound steel sledgehammer with a thick fiberglass handle. He walked right up to the very base of the towering 3-ton brick slab. His highly impatient plan was incredibly simple and entirely deadly. He intended to aggressively smash out the lowest load-bearing row of red bricks. He naively assumed the tall wall would simply lose its physical balance and slowly tip backward. He truly thought it would gently fall over, just like a tall, freshly cut pine tree. But a brick wall is absolutely nothing like a solid wooden tree. It does not possess a rigid internal skeleton to hold its geometric shape together. A brick wall is basically just thousands of heavy clay blocks heavily stacked on top of each other. When you suddenly remove the vital bottom support, the top does not magically float in the empty air. The contractor raised the heavy steel sledgehammer high above his right shoulder. He swung it aggressively downward with his absolute maximum physical force. The heavy forged steel head violently impacted the fragile, century-old bottom row. The tremendous kinetic energy instantly pulverized the old masonry blocks into a thick cloud of red dust. This was the precise moment his human plan violently collided with the unbreakable laws of nature. The sudden removal of the primary bottom support did not cause the wall to slowly tilt sideways. It immediately triggered a completely catastrophic and highly vertical structural collapse. A sheer vertical drop is dictated entirely by the blind, emotionless force of gravity. A normal human brain requires roughly 250 milliseconds to physically process sudden danger. Gravity operates significantly faster than human biology can ever physically react. The contractor desperately tried to step backward as a deafening rumble filled the freezing air. He truly thought he had a few long seconds to safely walk away. He had absolutely zero time left. The entire 3-ton monolithic slab of interlocking bricks instantly dropped straight down. It fell rapidly like a massive, unstoppable stone guillotine. The immense, unforgiving dead weight violently struck the man before he could even raise his bare hands. He was instantly pinned directly onto the heavily compacted, freezing dirt floor. The medical consequences of the severe impact were immediate, absolute, and heavily documented. The official coroner's report meticulously detailed the exact mechanical sequence of the sudden tragedy. The massive weight caused a total structural failure of the chest and torso. The heavy falling bricks inflicted massive, entirely non-survivable, blunt force trauma to the subject's highly vulnerable torso. The sheer mechanical pressure triggered instantaneous, catastrophic mechanical compression of the entire thoracic cavity. This horrific physical trauma directly resulted in an immediate and highly permanent loss of total consciousness. Immediate and completely irreversible fatal cardiac arrest inevitably followed in a mere matter of seconds. The deafening roar of the heavy collapse was quickly replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. A massive cloud of ancient white mortar dust slowly drifted across the ruined factory yard. It completely coated the freezing ground in a thick, ghostly layer of gray powder. The contractor's heavy steel sledgehammer lay completely untouched on the dirty floor. It rested quietly merely inches away from the massive pile of heavy red rubble. The rigid laws of physics do not ever negotiate with human impatience or tight financial deadlines. A highly complex structural demolition was violently completed in less than 1 single second. The absolute ultimate price for a faster workday was a permanent exit from the living world. September 2006, a steeply pitched residential roof sat exactly 3 full stories above a paved concrete driveway. The late afternoon sun beat down aggressively on the dark, highly abrasive surface. The sharp, acrid smell of hot asphalt shingles and thick roofing tar filled the humid autumn air. A private roofing contractor was rushing frantically to finally finish a critical structural repair. A heavy, dark line of violently threatening rain clouds was rapidly approaching from the western horizon. He desperately needed to permanently seal the exposed wooden roof deck before the heavy storm finally arrived. Working continuously at a dangerous physical height of 30 feet inherently requires an absolutely flawless safety margin. Standard occupational safety protocols always strictly dictate the mandatory use of a highly engineered fall arrest system. A professional worker must absolutely wear a heavy nylon harness securely anchored to a thick safety rope. The completely critical connection point between the human and the rope is the heavy-duty metal carabiner. A legally certified industrial carabiner is carefully forged from extremely high-strength steel or specialized aerospace aluminum. It is specifically engineered to easily withstand at least 5,000 pounds of sudden, explosive dynamic force. This incredible heavy-duty strength is fundamentally necessary because of the brutal laws of physical momentum. When a rapidly falling human body violently reaches the very end of a slack safety line, it does not just gracefully stop. The sudden, violent deceleration massively multiplies the person's total physical weight in a fraction of a single second. The highly busy contractor currently had his heavy yellow nylon safety harness tightly strapped securely to his body, but he suddenly realized he had accidentally left his certified steel carabiner way down in his parked truck. Walking all the way down the tall, 30-foot aluminum extension ladder would logically cost him precious minutes. The fast-approaching rain was heavily threatening to completely ruin his fully exposed interior construction project. He selfishly chose to actively implement an incredibly fast, profoundly fatal quick fix instead of doing the right thing. He casually unclipped a very small, incredibly cheap accessory carabiner directly from his canvas tool bag. It was made entirely of silicon, a highly brittle, incredibly cheap industrial zinc aluminum alloy. This completely lightweight metal clip was manufactured exclusively for holding lightweight car keys or a small plastic water bottle. It cost exactly $2 at a cheap local hardware store. He foolishly used this incredibly fragile metal toy to firmly clip his heavy safety harness to the main lifeline. He confidently returned to his highly urgent patching work near the very sharp edge of the tall roof. The psychological illusion of complete personal security was profoundly strong and entirely deceptive. He truly believed he was perfectly safely tethered to the solid, unmoving structural mass of the house. But cheap aluminum alloy has absolutely zero structural tensile strength under any heavy physical loads. It completely lacks the mechanical ability to safely bend, safely stretch, or safely absorb any significant, sudden stress. 10 minutes later, the fast-moving worker carefully shifted his body weight to rapidly reach a drop tool. His thick, rubber-soled work boot firmly stepped directly onto a highly loose, sandy patch of fine asphalt grit. The completely critical mechanical friction between his rubber shoe and the steep roof vanished in an instant. He instantly lost his physical balance and immediately began to slide rapidly downward toward the gutter. He slid rapidly off the sharp roof edge of the tall building and straight into the completely empty abyss. For a tiny, highly fleeting fraction of a single second, he actually felt a massive wave of psychological relief. He clearly felt the heavy nylon safety line aggressively pull perfectly taut against his waist. He genuinely believed his safety gear was going to safely catch his rapidly falling body. He truly believed his cheap, lazy shortcut had actually worked exactly as he had originally planned. But the sudden, violent physical stop of his falling body instantly generated a massive, horrific dynamic shock load. Over 2,000 pounds of raw kinetic force instantly focused precisely on the tiny metal accessory clip. The incredibly brittle silicon alloy did not physically bend, stretch, or slowly deform at all. It violently shattered instantly into a dozen jagged metallic pieces, snapping exactly like cheap, extremely thin glass. The absolutely critical safety lifeline violently detached from his physical body in the absolute blink of an eye. He violently plummeted completely freely through 30 vertical feet of entirely empty, utterly unforgiving atmospheric air. He impacted the hard concrete driveway below with horrific, completely unmitigated downward physical force. The brutal medical reality of the immediate impact was thoroughly detailed in the final official coroner's report. The extreme kinetic energy of the rapid fall transferred completely and violently directly into his human skeletal structure. The subject suffered catastrophic, entirely non-survivable, blunt force trauma to his cranium and upper cervical spinal column. The overwhelming physical shock instantly caused a catastrophic and highly permanent, total systemic failure of the central nervous system. This catastrophic trauma directly caused an immediate, highly permanent loss of total consciousness upon extreme physical impact. Total systemic biological collapse quickly followed the fatal injury, resulting inevitably in immediate and totally fatal cardiac arrest. The quiet, peaceful suburban street instantly fell completely silent once again under the heavy gray clouds. The heavy yellow safety line gently swung back and forth in the rapidly approaching cold storm wind. It was completely useless, casually dangling a broken nylon loop freely over the entirely empty concrete driveway. A tiny, violently broken piece of cheap silver metal lay quietly on the dark ground, completely nearby. The absolute ultimate price for saving a 10-minute ladder climb was completely paid in full with a human life. May 2002. A frustrated suburban homeowner stubbornly refused to pay a highly expensive professional repair fee. His heavy wooden garage door had completely jammed shut overnight. The stagnant air inside the cramped space smelled sharply of old motor oil, cut grass, and damp concrete. He decided to spend his Saturday morning fixing the complex mechanical issue entirely by himself. A standard double garage door is a massive object that easily weighs well over 300 pounds. It is physically impossible for a normal human being to safely lift that much dead weight manually every single day. To solve this heavy lifting problem, structural engineers utilize a massive steel torsion spring system. This incredibly thick coil of high-carbon steel is permanently mounted directly above the wooden door frame. It operates exactly like a giant, tightly wound mousetrap suspended in the air. It safely stores an immense amount of rotational kinetic energy to physically counterbalance the massive dead weight of the heavy wooden panels. When the garage door goes down to the floor, the heavy spring tightly winds up. When the door goes up, the spring rapidly unwinds, doing all the heavy lifting for the human user. Adjusting the extreme physical tension on this heavy industrial spring is a strictly regulated, highly dangerous process. A trained professional technician must absolutely use 2 solid steel winding bars to perform the job safely. These specific heavy metal rods are exactly 18 inches long and perfectly fit the metal winding cone. But the extremely impatient homeowner did not own the proper solid steel tools required for the heavy task. He desperately wanted to save the expensive $100 service fee of calling a professional repair company. He confidently walked over to his red metal toolbox and selected a completely fatal mechanical quick fix. He blindly grabbed 2 ordinary flathead screwdrivers with heavily worn hard plastic handles. He carefully climbed a tall aluminum stepladder and firmly inserted the first screwdriver into the heavy steel winding cone. He aggressively pushed upward, using his own physical body weight to violently twist the massive steel coil tighter. The psychological illusion of complete mechanical control was incredibly strong but entirely deceptive. He truly believed a standard household hand tool could safely hold back the terrifying rotational force of the loaded spring. But ordinary flathead screwdrivers are strictly engineered only to gently turn small, lightweight metal screws into soft wood. Their highly brittle plastic handles are fundamentally not designed to ever withstand massive lateral shear force. As the homeowner forcefully pushed the first screwdriver upward, he urgently attempted to quickly insert the second one. He desperately needed to securely lock the rotation in place to adjust the heavy metal brackets. This was the precise moment his completely naive human plan violently shattered against the unbreakable laws of physical mechanics. The heavy torsion spring was now fully loaded with several hundred pounds of brutal rotational torque. The immense, unstoppable mechanical pressure violently transferred directly into the cheap plastic handle of the very first screwdriver. The rigid yellow plastic simply could not safely absorb the overwhelming, highly concentrated lateral stress. It violently snapped cleanly in half with a deafening, incredibly sharp crack that echoed loudly through the entire garage. The sudden structural failure of the improvised holding tool instantly released the massive trapped kinetic energy. The massive high-carbon steel spring violently unwound in a tiny, highly fleeting fraction of a single second. Driven by the explosive rotational force, the heavy metal components violently whipped around the central metal shaft. They aggressively moved significantly faster than the human eye could ever physically track in real time. The highly focused homeowner had absolutely zero time to instinctively pull his head away from the mechanical danger zone. The heavy steel cone and the jagged broken metal tool violently impacted the side of his completely unprotected head. The brutal medical reality of the immediate physical impact was meticulously documented in the final official coroner's report. The overwhelming kinetic energy transferred completely and violently directly into his human skeletal structure. The human skull cannot ever withstand that extreme level of concentrated, instantaneous mechanical force. The subject instantly suffered a fatal head injury that caused an immediate loss of consciousness. The tremendous physical shock instantly and permanently compromised critical internal neural pathways within the human brain. This massive catastrophic structural trauma directly caused an immediate, highly permanent loss of total human consciousness. Total systemic biological collapse quickly followed the completely fatal mechanical head injury. This horrific internal damage inevitably resulted in an immediate and totally fatal cardiac arrest right there on the aluminum ladder. The peaceful suburban garage instantly fell completely silent once again under the bright, warm morning sun. The heavy wooden garage door remained firmly shut, completely unmoved and entirely unaffected by the violent mechanical event. High up near the ceiling, the massive steel coil sat perfectly still, completely empty of dangerous tension. It had completely spent all of its deadly stored energy in a single terrifying moment. A violently shattered piece of cheap yellow plastic handle lay quietly on the cold, oil-stained concrete floor directly below. The absolute ultimate price for aggressively rushing a highly complex repair task was completely paid in full with a single human life. The official medical examiner conclusively ruled the highly tragic incident as a completely accidental death caused entirely by severe mechanical negligence. July 2010. A stiflingly hot summer afternoon baked the concrete floor of a small, heavily cluttered residential garage. The thick, stagnant air was deeply saturated with the sharp, toxic smells of unburned gasoline and heavy aerosol chain lubricant. A young motorcycle enthusiast was frantically preparing his incredibly powerful Japanese sports bike for a fast evening ride. The heavy steel drive chain of the high-performance machine was deeply covered in sticky road grime and black sand. Standard mechanical maintenance protocols strictly demand a very slow, highly deliberate approach to safely cleaning this critical moving part. A completely safe rider must always place the heavy motorcycle securely onto a sturdy rear metal wheel stand. They must then absolutely ensure the powerful internal combustion engine is completely turned off and entirely silent. The mechanic must manually rotate the rear rubber tire with one bare hand while carefully wiping the metal chain with a soft cloth in the other. This completely tedious, entirely manual method absolutely guarantees that the heavy steel sprocket and heavy chain operate at a completely safe, fully controllable human speed. But the highly impatient rider was already running severely late to safely meet his loud group of fast friends across town. He desperately wanted to skip the slow physical labor and completely finish the dirty maintenance job in mere seconds. He made a highly reckless decision that fundamentally violated the absolute most basic rules of mechanical safety and physical common sense. He confidently lifted the heavy sports bike onto the metal rear stand, started the incredibly loud engine, and aggressively clicked the transmission directly into first gear. The powerful 100 horsepower engine quickly settled into a loud, incredibly steady mechanical idle. The heavy rear wheel immediately began to spin entirely automatically in the empty air above the concrete floor. The thick steel drive chain rapidly blurred as it continuously fed directly into the incredibly sharp steel teeth of the heavy rear sprocket. The psychological illusion of complete mechanical efficiency and personal safety was incredibly strong. The deeply focused rider casually grabbed a heavy red cotton shop rag tightly in his right hand. He knelt down extremely closely beside the rapidly spinning rear wheel and confidently pressed the loose fabric directly against the moving steel chain. He truly believed he could easily pull his human hand away if anything dangerous ever actually went wrong. This was a profoundly fatal misunderstanding of heavy industrial torque and basic mechanical rotational physics. A running internal combustion engine absolutely does not ever feel physical fatigue, momentary hesitation, or any human empathy. It is a completely blind, strictly emotionless generator of raw, highly unstoppable mechanical rotational force. As the young rider forcefully pressed the heavy red rag against the bottom of the rapidly moving chain, a very loose, frayed thread of the heavy cotton fabric casually snagged. It instantly caught securely onto a highly sharp steel tooth of the rapidly spinning rear metal sprocket. The violent mechanical reaction was absolutely instantaneous and completely unforgiving. The powerful motorcycle engine absolutely did not stall, slow down, or mechanically hesitate for a single microsecond. The massive rotational torque instantly grabbed the trapped cotton fabric and aggressively, violently yanked the entire rag forward. Because the rider was gripping the thick cloth extremely tightly, his physical safety was instantly compromised. Normal human reflexes require roughly a quarter of a second to physically react to sudden danger. The rapidly spinning steel sprocket was moving significantly faster than the human nervous system could ever process. In less time than the absolute blink of an eye, The heavy steel chain violently pulled his right upper extremity directly into the critical mechanical pinch point. The soft human biology was instantly trapped permanently between the heavy steel chain and the highly solid metal sprocket. The horrific medical consequences of this severe mechanical entrapment were heavily detailed in the final official coroner's report. The overwhelming mechanical pressure instantly caused catastrophic structural failure of the skeletal framework within the right upper extremity. The heavy metal teeth inflicted massive, entirely non-survivable mechanical compression to the subject's highly vulnerable arm. This extreme localized trauma immediately compromised completely critical major arterial structures within the limb. The catastrophic structural compromise of major arterial pathways instantly triggered a massive, highly catastrophic systemic physiological shock. The sheer overwhelming severity of the sudden, localized physical trauma triggered an extreme neurogenic shockwave throughout the entire central nervous system. This horrific biological overload directly resulted in an immediate and highly permanent loss of total human consciousness. Total systemic biological collapse quickly followed the fatal mechanical injury, culminating inevitably in immediate and totally fatal cardiac arrest right on the garage floor. The official medical examiner conclusively ruled the highly tragic incident as a completely accidental death, caused entirely by severe mechanical negligence. The small residential garage instantly filled with a heavy, suffocating mechanical silence once the violent chaos ended. The heavy sports bike eventually stalled out on its own and quietly shut down, completely undamaged by the violent physical encounter. A violently torn piece of heavy red cotton rag remained tightly woven deeply into the cold steel teeth of the rear wheel. The absolute ultimate price for aggressively rushing a simple, 5-minute maintenance task was a highly permanent exit from the living world. The mechanical physics were always obvious, but arrogance blinded them. If you had to assign ultimate blame for these tragedies, who is truly at fault? The fragile human brain for naturally seeking the easy way out, or the unforgiving modern rush that demands we work faster? Drop your brutal verdict below. Subscribe and like this video before your next shift begins.